Myself is Nabil Mancheri. I am the senior advisor of the rare earth materials at the EIT Raw Materials. Here we have 4 speakers today. This is, as many of you have joined previously, this is the 5th event in our Magellan Project EIT Raw Materials event rare earth roundtable series. And thank you all for joining today. Today, our first speaker is Caroline Massacre, and she is the senior editor at the Fastmarkets. She has over 10 years of experience, especially on critical raw materials and especially on rare earth and pricing issues. And so, Caroline, maybe we can start. Floor is yours. You have to unmute.
I've unmuted.
Yes. So
okay.
Nice to have you here, and let's start the presentation. Yeah.
Okay, lovely. And thank you very much for inviting me. And I am just going to share my screen and hope that everything lines up the first time.
Yes, it's coming. Yes.
Yep, you got it?
Yes.
Great. Okay, lovely. Make me a deal, Nabil. You asked me a really difficult question, so I gathered a lot of information. So if it looks like I'm running over time, can you give me a 2-minute warning and I'll go straight to summary? Because I don't.
Yes, sure.
I know we have a lot to get through today.
Yeah.
And thank you everyone for joining this webinar today. Fastmarkets, the company I work for, is a leading cross-commodity price reporting agency covering metals and mining, agriculture, forest products, and voluntary carbon markets. Our price data, forecasts, and market analyses help customers navigate complex, volatile, and often opaque markets. Well, opaque, that's definitely rare earths. And I have to tell you that of the 6,000 prices up there, a lot of them are metals. So we cover an awful lot of ground. Okay, we're going to need a bigger slide. I tried to look at what has just happened, and I actually defer to Thomas on some of the finer points of China policy, because that is labyrinthine in complexity. But what I wanted to do is, you got to put it in a little bit of context. So I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of what just happened. And I'm not going to drag you back to 2010, which I'm sure you're probably glad to hear, but I might drag you back to 2023 really quickly. Okay, all right, off we go. December 21st, 2023, China formalizes export ban on rare earth extraction, separation, metallization, and magnet technology. This ban was already in place, but it sort of sets the scene. Next, I'm going to May 2024. The US announces 25% tariffs on Chinese permanent magnets starting in 2026. Now, this was a big deal at the time because previously everything since 2018, or the Section 301, excluded rare earths and rare earth products. So we looked up and we noticed this. Now it's going to January. A big event that was, I think, it's taken 10 years to do is that China completes the consolidation into 2 producers, Northern Rare Earth Group and China Rare Earth Group, where once there were hundreds of rare earth producers, now there are 2 enormous SOEs. Okay, now the 1st of February 2025, I've nicknamed the good old days, because on the 1st of February, we were all really shocked that there were going to be 10% tariffs on imports of Chinese rare earths, which was a big deal at the time, but with hindsight, it looks like absolutely nothing now. And now we start the tit for tat retaliation. On the 4th of February, China imposes additional 15% tariffs on coal and LNG, 10% higher duties on American crude, agricultural machinery, and some cars, starting on the 10th of February. 3rd of March, US increases the additional tariffs on Chinese goods, including rare earths, to 20%. A bit more worrying for the market. March the 4th, China retaliates with a 15% tariff on US chicken, wheat, corn, cotton, 10% tariffs on soybeans and other food products. Now, the reciprocals. 2nd of April, Trump in the Rose Garden announces the so-called reciprocal tariffs on, let's just call it the entire world, with 34% on China, effective April the 5th. Now, we discovered quite quickly that rare earths were excluded, but we didn't have much time to relax, because 48 hours later, on Friday the 4th of April, China announced 34% tariffs, which is not what we were really worried about that day, because they also put export controls on products made from 7 heavy rare earths, samarium, gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium, lutetium, scandium, and yttrium, and most surprisingly for a lot of people watching, on the high performance magnets, that is neodymium iron boron magnets that contain dysprosium and terbium, and also samarium cobalt magnets. That bit was shocking for the market. When I was doing it that day, I was actually phoning people saying, "Are you really sure it's the magnets too?" I mean, for years there was an urban legend in rare earth, which is, they might restrict material, they'll never restrict the magnets, and that clearly it no longer exists. That situation has completely changed. I spent a lot of time on the phone talking to US importers and materials importers. I don't want to take up the whole webinar with it, but there is a lot to talk about. If you didn't get your order for material in by the end of February, you don't have that material, because the process is actually quite long anyway. And off the top, the people waiting for the magnets in the US, that seems to be the most concerning situation. But I don't want to, I can come back to it, but let's see what happened next. 9th of April. 7th of April, the US threatens another 50%, is really annoyed that China retaliates and says, if you don't take, we'll put it to 50% if you don't take the 34% off by April the 8th. 9th of April. Yes, China retaliates with 84% tariffs on US goods. Also on the same day, 9th of April, US response again increases to 125%, 125%. That's 145% if you include the original 20% on Chinese goods, and announces a 90-day reprieve for everybody else, who are reduced to 10%. 11th of April, China announces an increase from 84% to 125% effective April 12th, matching the US reciprocal tariff, excluding the extra 20%. And describes the situation as a joke and says it will not respond to any further increases, and reiterated a stance that it will, quote unquote, fight unto the end. 17th of April, also a very big day for rare earths, because MP Material announced the halting of concentrate shipments to China because of the tariffs, obviously being that high. According to USGS, they accounted for 11.5% of global production of REEs in 2024. So that is a lot of material. That's 10% of the market. And the statement they put out was, we continue to produce and are stockpiling concentrate while accelerating downstream operations. The market situation at the moment is stuck between fear and denial, and an awful lot of things aren't happening. That's the only way I can describe it. And I mean, take the tariff. A lot of people I've spoken to said the tariffs will come off, and maybe MP can ship some material again. But it's obviously incredibly uncertain. Okay, let's go back to something a bit more familiar. We're all very used to looking at this. So you've got neodymium, praseodymium, or NdPr for short, because no one wants to say neodymium, praseodymium all day. Not under export control. Dysprosium under export control, terbium under export control, and then you've got the magnets containing dysprosium, terbium under export control. And for years, we've really been looking at this diagram because it is 80% of the value globally. But what's happened now with those export controls on all these other products is, instead of looking only at this, we're now starting to look at this. I think there will be more discussion about some of these products later on, so I don't want to take up a lot of time with it now. I've marked out the elements under export control. I would just encourage you to look and see the range of sectors that are covered here. We've got healthcare, chip manufacturing, nuclear energy, catalysts, ceramics, electronics, lasers. This is a lot of material, and criticality has never inferred volume. It infers necessity. And for some of these products, it's really hard to see how, if they can't rely on China, where they can get the product from, because a lot of them are very specific high purity products. Okay, let's move on. These are my prices, our prices at Fastmarkets. We cover, as you would expect, the magnetics, the NdPr DyTb, and the metal, and also ferrodysprosium. We also have 2 European prices for neodymium oxide and praseodymium oxide. And I also have a gadolinium price. And what I'm looking at there is not the niche magnetics. I'm actually looking at aerospace, nuclear power, and healthcare is the contrast agent. So I cover, with this trade, I will price it. If there is liquidity, then I am there. And as you can imagine, in the current situation, we're in a number of discussions, and you can expect some change. Okay. Something I want to say really quickly about rare earth prices, because I think it's important. Chinese rare earth prices move on policy announcements. For example, if you look at the end of 2023, in December, there was an announcement of an additional production quota for the year, bringing it up to 3, and then normally 2. And this really piled on the impression of oversupply. You look what the price did in the first quarter of that year. And then the producers came back and they wanted to push up the prices because they were either loss-making or very nearly loss-making. There was this big effort to do that, and it just sort of started to die away again. And then on 1st of July, the government announced a new policy on rare earth management starting on the 1st of October. And that really strengthened sentiment. You know, prices began to move. And one thing I do know for certain, because I spoke to a lot of people about it at the time, towards the end of last summer, the big Chinese buyers came back. They started buying. I even spoke to one large producer who said, you know, they're back and they're buying and people aren't even talking about it. So there was some market activity there. But once again, you see, it's like it just keeps bouncing. It all began to fade away. And then in February, the Chinese government said, we are looking at a consultation of some new policies on traceability that would potentially include the imports of raw materials into the production caps, which would have an impact on supply. And you can see the market reaction. Now look at April 4th, right? Nothing, everything stops, it freezes. There are no offers. There is nothing. NdPr then sort of drifts down, and you can see dysprosium does absolutely nothing and terbium spikes, which is a strange market reaction, but we'll talk more about that later. Okay, now this map is not, if you think this map is an image of all the magnet projects outside Asia, it's actually not. What I was trying to do was I was trying to find a way to explain and understand what the current situation is for magnet production outside China. Because you'll notice, if you're really eagle-eyed, you'll have noticed that, for example, Macango isn't there, and they've just had an update on their project in the US. They also have a project in the UK. What I did is I really focused on players like EV Magnetics, who are launching in South Carolina in the autumn. And they don't actually disclose the full phase 1 amounts, but I have here an estimate of 1,500 to 2,000 tons of sintered neodymium iron boron magnets a year. And was also NEO in Narva, Estonia, with a first phase capacity of 2,000 tons a year, also launching in the autumn. What I really wanted to know is answer the question, you know, how much? What does this actually mean? And how can I understand the numbers in a way that makes sense to me in terms of what the magnet capacity is outside China? And bear in mind, we've also got, there's a project in India, there's a big project in South Korea. There are projects, there will probably be more projects, I would imagine. So what I did is I went and asked for a calculation. So I went to JORC and I said, give me a calculation of the number of vehicles this could represent if I took a figure of 6,000 tons. It's not a scientific figure, it's just a figure. I said, what if we had this, what would that mean? And so we've got a mix of 30% battery electric vehicles, 10% plug-in hybrids, and 60% hybrids. Average magnet weight, 2.4 kilograms. That's 2.5 million vehicles. It's not an awful lot. And then my next question was, okay, well, if that's what we've got, how do we get what we need? So how much NdPr that you need? 2,200 tons of NdPr, also not a lot if you look at Lynas expanding to 10,000 tons per year. So NdPr doesn't seem to be a stress point. Now, this is where it gets more controversial, heavy rare earths. Everyone is talking about heavy rare earths. People will be talking about heavy rare earths a lot more in the coming weeks and months. So I took a figure, it's not, it's open to interpretation, but I said, I know that dysprosium is going to be coming down out of all the magnets. People are going to be engineering it out even more than they were before. But I was saying, okay, 3% dysprosium, 0.5% terbium with caveats, just to see what's the maximum that you could need with that. And I came up with 30 tons of terbium oxide and 180 tons of dysprosium oxide. Again, not a great deal. And if Lynas comes on in the second half with dysprosium and terbium, so is there enough material for these projects? Yes. Are they very big? No. And next, I went to see, now recycling is a whole presentation, and recycling will become even more important than it already is, but it's a presentation in itself. The heavy rare earth mining is a consultation project and a very difficult one. I think you'll find some of the best minds in the business will struggle to tell you, or will have a lot of interesting, very intelligent, nuanced responses to where do we get the heavy rare earths from outside, outside the current monopoly. So I took a look and I've said, okay, these are the projects that I can see. Let's start off with Linus because it's the first. I have tried really hard to get more information out of Linus, but all they will tell me is the start date is the second half of this year. And they haven't got a capacity figure, but I do have a throughput capacity, which is 1,500 tons a year, mixed heavy concentrate, SEGH. Products, dysprosium, terbium, unseparated SEG, holmium concentrate, and unseparated SEGH. And the feedstock is obviously Mount Weld. But Carester in Europe, start date for fourth quarter of 2026. It's also a recycling project, but I've focused it on the 5,000 tons a year of heavy rare earth mineral concentrates and the capacity of production of 500 tons a year of dysprosium, 90 tons a year of terbium. Linus have another project in the US. The start date is it's harder to pin down. It's July 2025, June 2026. The capacity is bigger. Energy Fuels are pilot testing in Utah. They already have a 1,000 tons a year NdPr circuit, which is currently switched to making uranium. And I mentioned rare earth salts because they are not producing the kind of capacity that magnet makers think in, but they are actually making terbium in the US. And not all the applications require huge amounts. So I just wanted to mention that they are producing them from recycled fluorescent bulbs. So I think the big question is, like, if you want diversified magnet production, it's going to have to get a lot bigger than it is today. Now, this slide is the slide that I use when I want to explain why this is so hard. And if you will, if you can envisage ignoring funding, ignoring export controls, ignoring where you're going to get the heavy rare earths from, this is still difficult. It's technologically challenging because it covers so many different areas. Magnets are physics. Separation is chemical engineering. And you have to line up all these pieces of the puzzle. And I was talking to someone the other day and they were asking about outsourcing, all these different phases that must surely be outsourced. And I was like, no, not so much. People just have to do it themselves. Okay, so now conclusions. Tariffs likely to come off? I think possibly, although they'll be leveraging each other around the world trying to do that. Enormous pressure on substitution, and substitution, frankly, everywhere. People using rare earths are already looking for ways to switch to something else. Will the magnet projects get the materials they need? I'm saying yes, most likely. The situation for the magnet consumers in the US is incredibly difficult. I even went through the end user statement. As a guy said to me, look, we get a container from China. It's got 20 different articles in it. That's 20 different customers. We have hundreds of customers. Of those 20 articles, those customers are not the end user. And if you're on automotive, your end user is 3 to 4 places down the supply chain. So how are we supposed to do that? What else can we imagine? I mean, in terms of the tariffs, I think what you're saying is if you take the global trading system and you put it in a snow globe and you shake it really hard, and then you wait to see where it settles, it is incredibly hard to understand where this will settle. And I think if anyone says to you they know where it will, I'd treat them with caution. It is an incredibly fluid situation. Consolidation, integration, yeah, I'm sure we'll see some of that. But there's another point, which is one of the more sort of painful truths of rare earths from the point of view of someone trying to predict anything about what's going to happen, is that you cannot separate rare earths from the role of the state. This isn't a political decision, a philosophical choice, or what you think is right, wrong, or fair. It's just a fact. China spent decades pouring money and investment into rare earths. You're not going to match that. And if you look at Lynas Rare Earths, the long-standing major, the only producing project to come out of the 2010-2011 crisis and survive and keep going, and then you look at the support of the Japanese government. And also the projects in the US, projects in Australia, there is government funding and there is government support here, there. And so people also forget that rare earths is a tiny industry. It's a really, really small industry. You can get all the executives into a room that's not that big if you wanted to, right? Or if they wanted to stand that close to each other. It's a small industry feeding into ginormous industries. And that is the problem that we are wrestling with and have wrestled with for many years. But if you're really asking the question, what's the impact? What's coming next? The only way to know that is to understand what policymakers around the world are going to do.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline.
Closing slide.
Yes.
Depending on how you feel about the intervening 2,000 years, this comment is comforting or not comforting. I find it slightly comforting, but I'll let you make up your own mind. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for a very excellent presentation, as always, and bold statement, as we are dealing with the policy and government and regulations. And so we will have a discussion at the end of the session. So please be patient. And we have a few questions already, so no worries. So the next one in my list is, so let's go around. So you started from the US, let's just come back to the EU. So the next one in line is Nassif Tazim. He's from the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. He's the project officer, looking at the rare earths and magnet value chain, largely on the end-of-life products, and he has been contributing to a number of European directives and policies. Nassif, the floor is yours, and I look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Nabil. Thank you, and thanks again for this opportunity. I think you see my slides on presentation mode, right?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, hello everyone, and I will quickly update you on some GRC activities related to policy suggestions in various EU policy files, and this with the aim towards a more competitive EU magnet value chain. So I will start the presentation with a brief presentation of the GRC, the Joint Research Center, and its position within the European Commission. Then I will recall why we are working on permanent magnets and rare earth. I will try to be complementary with what Caroline already said. Then we will follow up with some ongoing and potentially future activities we are handling at our unit to support the developments of a competitive rare earth and magnet value chain in the EU. And since our activities and way of working are inclusive, we'll mention at the end where you can contribute to these activities. So like today more than ever, we need sound evidence to support policy. And as a strategic partner at the core of the Commission, the Joint Research Center is co-designing its work program with policy DGs or other member states. We are in the fortunate position actually of being a research center inside the executive arm of the European Union, meaning we are able to participate in policy-making discussions. This also gives us the role to connect disciplines and policies and talk directly to policymakers. And with this, our leitmotif and purpose are clear. We need to always anticipate, integrate, and provide impactful suggestions and recommendations. So the Joint Research Center in number is as following. We are scientists after all, and this you can see it with the number of PhD holders, scientists, and technical staff, also the scientific publications and research facilities. And beyond this, we are based in 5 member states of the EU. The lines about the budget here is to also recall that we are independent from any policy agenda. We are policy neutral, but also independent from any private, commercial, or national interest. This is why our position has allowed us to anticipate and provide science-based evidence related to several topics. I choose here circularity and critical raw materials as they are in the core of our team analysis since many years. I provided here the examples of GRC support to the eco-design regulation on servers and data storage, where we highlighted, for instance, the need to declare the share of neodymium in hard drive to allow, for example, its recycling afterwards. This also led to standardization activities where we are present too. And more lately on the right, two JRC reports published by colleagues to support with evidence the implementation of the new batteries regulation as well as the SPR regulation. And in all activities, we try to provide some interactive data of open access that are available on the RMIS website. So I invite you, for instance, to go there and select per value chain, space, vehicles, etc., to check some data. So here, basically, the topic was announced a little bit before, but since first JRC studies, rare earth elements and permanent magnet materials were highlighted as important for several products and value chain in the EU. And this was, for instance, in the JRC report here on the left that I'm showing here that serves as a basis to prepare the EC report on critical raw materials, but also to support the EU action plan for circular economy. Then it was followed up by more recent JRC reports that investigated the role of rare earth and permanent magnets in various technologies, including EU strategic technologies. So I can make these like personal and bold statements, since we're talking about bold statements here, that rare earth and green or digital transitions are two sides of the same coin. So then we can understand that mitigating challenges and barriers related to access or to these materials in general will be a success factor to ensure EU competitiveness. Then for JRC Science for Policy activities, the focus from the rare earth big family of elements is mainly on permanent magnet and the lesser content, at least from my side, on catalyst, as the two are already responsible for I think more than 60% of the total rare earth oxide consumption in these recent years. But by volume and more importantly by value, rare earth permanent magnet were responsible for over 95% of the total value of global rare earth oxide consumption. And this share is poised to expand further as the demand continue to rise for these permanent magnet materials. So we are focusing in principle on the four major magnets. So from the neodymium one, samarium, alnico, and ferrites. But the neodymium magnets are in general having a deeper look as they are the strongest type of magnets commercially available today. Their share is deemed also to be higher in the future. Also, their characteristics are low like related to size and weight sensitive applications, where they surpass in principle the other type of magnet, make them more important, but also because of their higher sensitivity to market movements. Like actually here I wanted to like remember the issues and incidents since 2000 like related to like rare trade, but like Caroline provided before a wonderful overview of just what's happened this quite 2 years ago. So it is so there is a need to like de-risk and strengthen the resilience of the EU value chain like related to like magnet. This is another recall slide. I think the audience have somehow clear value, somehow like clear idea about where the magnet materials are sourced from and what is the production share of the EU for primary, secondary, refined or magnet alloys. Well, it's almost null, but what I guess my other colleague from the European Commission will mention like later on, there will be in the future higher shares made in the EU or partners in principle. But the EU has also another untapped and huge potential, and that is the urban mine valorization. And for this, we are extensively working on valorizing this potential. And I will give you some examples on how this is explored, assessed, and done. So while reflecting on this, actually, I think the best example at policy level existing so far is the new batteries regulation and our contribution to make raw material and circularity addressed in various binding articles, considering a whole life cycle thinking and a whole life cycle approach, addressing aspects such as resource efficiency, responsible thinking, different air strategies. We can think about reuse, recycling, remanufacturing, etc. We can clearly say that these are a first of a kind at EU policy level. They are clearly changing the game for products to be put on the EU markets, and this is why some of these measures are also assessed and suggested by the JRC for other policy files addressing failures related to rare earth and permanent magnet. So on the Critical Raw Material Act that entered into force last year, I will focus on the circularity chapters in principle. So on its Article 26 on national measures on circularity, member states are asked to adopt, implement, and include in their national programs measures designed to promote waste prevention, but also increase collection, sourcing, and processing of CRM-rich waste. And at the GRC level, with the support of the EU project Futuram, we will provide soon a list of prioritized waste streams and CRMs to focus on, and as well as the methodological process that will allow us to have such conclusions. And then, so this is the first time actually we are publicly providing this slide, and we are showing here as an example how elements of the implementing act would look like. So for instance, we will suggest to focus as an example of flow on wind turbines products, prioritize or increase the collection of permanent magnets from the generators, and this is for both onshore and offshore waste streams. Then permanent magnet recyclability this time received a special interest under the CRMA under the Article 228, and for this special interest, the GRC also team up with a special partner, and that is the CEN/TC 472 on rare earth under the CEN/CENELEC to provide a standardization document to show how the 4 magnet types should be labeled and which type of information should be provided by the manufacturers to the rest of the value chain to ensure their recyclability. So this will be the content of the Implementing Act on the label and the information folder, complemented with the Delegated Act on combined nomenclature codes to provide further clarification on the scope of products to be labeled. So this work is ongoing now, and we will soon launch a stakeholder consultation, what I'm mentioning here in red, and I will mention at the end how you can participate if you want to this stakeholder discussion. GRC will, in principle, also support the Article 29 of the CRMA. GRC was behind all studies supporting the implementation of potential recycled content measures for products. We will then naturally continue to do the same for permanent magnet under Article 29 of the CRMA, where we will develop calculation and verification rules on how to declare the share of permanent magnet recycled contents in the product that are put on the EU market and mentioned in the previous Article 28. So this will be included in the Delegated Act foreseen under the same article. So same here, with the collaboration of colleagues from DG GROW handling this file, we will also run a stakeholder consultation combined also with Article 28, and we will provide, I will actually provide further details at the end of my slides. Article 31, this time of the CRMA, is also following this life cycle thinking approach. It is about the environmental footprint declaration, and basically what will be done here by colleagues would be to combine GRC knowledge on MSA and LCA for different CRMs to identify the 3 impact categories, including climate change, following the EU PEF methodology, then provide a preliminary shortlisting of CRMs to declare their environmental footprints. So the work is also ongoing. I'm also putting here the contact email of colleagues handling this project if you want to engage with them. And the output would be as a report where we should have a list of CRMs. I'm giving here some CRMs that are on the spotlight. You can see there like rare earth elements, but the top 3 so far, for example, are for instance, bauxite for aluminium, copper, and silicon metal. Then, yeah, the policy landscape is complex and evolving when it is about like rare earth element and magnet, not only like tariffs, but you can already have some ideas if you see the current and future consumption trends of magnets and how, for instance, mobility, machinery, and wind energy are almost covering around 90% of the end-use applications. So this is why policy files such as the ongoing end-of-life vehicle regulation, the Net Zero Industry Act, and ZIA secondary legislation, and the forthcoming WEEE review are also targeting magnets in their scope, considering, of course, the complementarity with the CRMA. So in under the ELV end-of-life vehicle regulation proposal that is ongoing, draft of the regulation is already online. Magnets were targeted at both design and end-of-life levels with measures such as labeling, ease of design, potential recycled content, as well as mandatory removal and stockpiling of components such as the drive motor prior to shredding to preserve the permanent magnet and to allow its further circularity. Then again, recall here there is a huge untapped potential related to magnets in the WEEE categories. That is why they should be targeted with measures to be assessed in the forthcoming WEEE review. We can think about measures related to more ambitious circularity, mitigate information failures, as well as the increase of the collection. Then the NZIA, the Net Zero Industry Act, is also addressing under Article 26 the introduction of the NPC, the non-price criteria, as a pre-qualification or award criteria to assess the auction's sustainability and resilience. And this for member states to potentially use them when designing auctions for the development, for the deployment of the NZIA-like technologies. We can, for example, like imagine here that a member state that is designing a new auction related to a wind farm, he might include an NPC targeting permanent magnet in wind turbines and provide extra points, for example, for the bidder providing higher circularity of permanent magnet that are incorporated. I will stop here for the moment. GRC is also reflecting on other measures such as waste codes for magnet that are not existing. We like also the simplification mood that this new commission is promoting, and we will ensure that this is reflected also in GRC suggestions, leading to more simplification while aiming always for more competitiveness of the EU value chain. But before, before handing back to you, Nabil, I want to ask like the audience here, what is missing so far from our assessments? And if you want to get involved, please note that we are preparing with DigiGrow colleagues a first workshop dedicated to CRMA, Article 28 and 29 secondary legislation. It will be online, date to be confirmed, but probably around end of May, beginning of June. Feel free to drop me a mail if you want to participate and provide your feedback, especially if you are an actor of the magnet value chain. Thank you, and back to you, Nabil.
Thank you, Nassif. Very good presentation and overview of the end-of-life recycling issues. And we will address the questions at the end of the session. So thank you again. So now I move to our third presentation. Is a well-known expert in the rare earth field is Thomas Krumer. He's the CEO of GT Ginger International Trade based in Singapore. Thomas, thank you for joining so far from Singapore and a bit late. And he's also the, he managed that most of the rare earth, people from the rare earth industry knows him through the Rare Earth Observer, the newsletter. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. It's well articulated content. Yeah, Thomas, again, thanks for joining. The floor is yours. You can share your presentation.
Okay. Sure. Is it this? Okay, how do we come to the beginning?
Yeah, it's coming.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I will. I have gone into the details on the restrictions on rare earth technology transfer from China and also China's dual-use licensing of certain rare earth products. A short disclaimer. My motto: seek truth from facts. I want to briefly browse through the applications because I think a lot is lost in the hype over magnets and such. So just let us look at our homes, and I can assure you that everything that you can switch on or off somehow is powered by rare earths. No car will run without rare earths. be it combustion engine or electric vehicle. No car will run without rare earths. Tires are made using rare earths. Gasoline refining, as Nassef pointed out, requires rare earths. Offshore wind farms require rare earths. Onshore, it is more a calculation if such an expensive turbine makes sense. Nuclear power plants use rare earths. The industry basically runs on rare earths. The internet runs on rare earths. Probably I'm reaching you through an erbium-doped fiber. Solid oxide fuel cells, hydrogen storage materials. So if the EU has a hydrogen policy, it better has also the materials. Data centers, the good old hard disks, I think per quarter about 60 million of them are still being produced. Aluminium becomes weldable because of rare earths. Hospitals run on rare earths. MRI scans, you even get an injection of rare earths. Laser surgery requires rare earths. Diarrhea medicine contains rare earths. Rare earth is used also for ceramics and glass coloring. You dope lenses with it in order to modify the refractive index. 50% of rare earth polishing powder is used for smartphone screens. Piglets feed on rare earths. Lighters contain rare earths. This is the first use, the gas lamp mantle for rare earths in 1887. Rare earths enable miniaturization, and this is life without rare earths. So some facts and figures. Since we are talking about magnets, please look at the fourth picture where there is a coin and there are the magnets next to it. I'll be very interested how you want to fix labels to this. So basically what you're looking at is the rare earth oxide market based on 2023 numbers of $5.4 billion, enabling industrial output of $3.3 trillion. The kick-on and the ripple effect from that is estimated by Adamas as 8.7 trillion. So we're talking about $12 trillion of GDP from only one single rare earth application. We have not visited any of the others. So in 2024, the world output of rare earth oxides should have been around 390,000 tons. The Chinese output out of that was 369,000 tons. China exported 46,500 tons of rare earth compounds. That I exclude the ferroalloys because they are really not related. And for the permanent magnets, the world output is estimated 330,000 tons. China's share of that is 310,000 tons, and it exported 58,147 tons. The capacity utilization in rare earth permanent magnets last year was 60%, by the way. Okay, now we come to the restrictions on the technology transfer. We exclusively talk about rare earths. There are a lot of EU CRMs where the technology restrictions also apply. I would advise the Research Council to have a look at that. Also, please consider there are thousands, if not 10,000s, of application and production and know-how patents out there. And as long as we don't get rid of global IP protection, we should also have a look at that. So the restrictions on the technology transfer legally based on the Foreign Trade Law of the People's Republic of China, relevant regulations, and they use the instrument that is the China Export Prohibited or Export Restricted Technology Catalog. This was first published in 2001. However, I found forensic evidence that there must have been a pre-existing version in 1998. Basically, it's two ministries who are responsible for this. This is the today's Ministry of Commerce and the Ministry of Science and Technology. There were published updates in 2008, 2020, 2023, and one is pending right now, which refers to lithium-ion battery know-how and gallium extraction from alumina production. It covers 115 categories from livestock breeding all the way to traditional Chinese medicine. There are two simple classifications. One is prohibited, that is a no-go zone, and restricted, where there is apparently some flexibility. It covers production and application know-how. So the items are numbered. Basically, the first two digits are the year that the catalog refers to. It's not necessarily the first year of restriction. And at the end, you have the letter J for prohibited or X for restricted. Prohibited is just that, it's prohibited. In case of restricted, some entities may apply to the provincial offices of the Ministry of Commerce for a permit to enter negotiations with foreigners, but they have to do this before talking to foreigners. Here we come a little bit into the listings of rare earths. Here we have the restriction on neodymium laser technology. Here we have basically everything under the sun for rare earth extraction all the way down to separation and everything that is prohibited. So basically everything under the sun for rare earths is prohibited. The number 4 item, rare earth calcium oxyborate, this refers to sensor technology. This item had already been on the list of 2001 as prohibited. Then this is a little bit controversial, ionic clay rare earth mining leaching process. This item had been on the very first catalog in 2001, but it has been moved from prohibited to restricted. I will explain that later. Then we have, of course, laser technology, artificial crystal growth, the preparation technology for magnetostrictive materials that is at the core of magnet technology, actually. Then, of course, the beneficiation and smelting technology that has not yet been invented. That is beautiful. This is a forward-looking restriction on anything that is not yet there. So because everything has already been covered by the previous prohibition, and this one is restricted, it's a little bit strange. So heat treatment technology, the carbon co-diffusion and so on, this is application technology. Then aviation material production technology, aluminum lithium alloy containing rare earths, and cast magnetic steel, very much application technology. Wire and cable, as I said, you know, I'm probably reaching you through a erbium doped glass fiber. So basically only 2 items are prohibited. Everything regarding rare earth production know-how as known, as practiced right now, and high power neodymium laser know-how. All the others are restricted. That means principally there should be leeway to apply and receive a license for technology transfer. Of course, the license requirements are not known, but probably you can guess that it would be China holding a controlling stake in the licensee, probably. Again, I have to point out, mind the patents, you know, and unless we have kicked global IP over the hill, this is something to watch very closely when you build anything or when you fund anything. Is it violating existing patents? So now we come back to the ionic clay rare earth mine leaching process. The conditions are not known, but this process is currently used in Myanmar, in Laos, and in Malaysia. And they produce raw materials, rare earth raw materials for shipment to China. So if they were not licensed, then it would be very difficult to envision that a China rare earth group should be buying it. Yeah. What I have to point out is that this leaching process is on the elimination list of China's National Development and Reform Commission, because it is, from my personal observation, an environmental complete disaster, and it is an erroneous way to go if you're looking for rare earths. All these heavy rare earth promoters with their deposits in ionic clay, I think they are going for destruction. So the question is, does all this matter to the EU? And I would say no. As long as the EU has no permanent disposal facility for inevitably occurring radioactive waste from rare earth processing, there is no way that the EU will be actively producing rare earths from primary ores. In my observation, and I'm covering about 200 deposits, there is not a single rare earth deposit out there with no radioactive content. Also, a lot of people will tell you, oh, but our radioactive content is very low. Yeah, but then please also look at the rare earth content that is also very low. You have to look at the radioactive content in proportion to the rare earth contents, and then it can be really high. So companies like Solvay and Carester, or Neo Performance Materials in Estonia, they can only use radionuclide-free raw material, which is currently only available from Rosatom, our friends in Russia. Rosatom have actually no interest in continuing supplies to the EU. And if you look into your import statistics, you will see that Rosatom is between 30 and 40% of the EU's imports of rare earths. Rosatom have already a history of cutting off companies such as Iresco in Kazakhstan, who closed shop a couple of years ago because the Russians said, we are not going to supply you anymore. So there is another policy that I find of concern, that is the look for strategic partner countries. And the CEO of Solvay in June last year suggested that the radioactive waste should stay with the strategic partner countries. This, I think, is a very questionable approach. And there is also another issue, which is there is a nuclear non-proliferation treaty, accession protocol between all the IAEA and all accession countries, which limits the amounts of radioactive waste that a country can produce and basically bury it. Yeah, anything that exceeds, for example, in Angola, anything that exceeds 10 tons per year, they have to account for and properly dispose of. The one rare earth project that is there in Angola will turn out about 1,500 tons of radioactive waste per year if they stick to their mining schedule. There's no solution for that, by the way. So here are the sources. You can click your way through to all the regulations that are mentioned. And we are coming to the dual-use export licensing, which caused a lot of hoo-ha. I kind of disagree with Caroline, but we will see. So China classified 7 rare earth elements as dual-use products. This does not only apply to the pure metals, but also to all products where these elements are contained. This has regards to China's obligations under the Nuclear Weapons Non-Proliferation Treaty, which China signed in 1968. They've been exporting rare earths for a little bit more than 40 years. It's a little strange that it now occurs to them that this should be under dual-use licensing, but it's okay. So under the rules, the exporter of a dual-use product must apply for an export license from China's Ministry of Commerce. Interestingly, the same rules also apply to China's imports. So in my view, the particular elements were chosen for maximum impact on the US defense industry. I give you here exclusively the defense relevant applications. So Scandium, the one US company, accounts for more than 1/3 of the world's scandium consumption. The application is solid oxide fuel cells for unmanned vehicles. The substrate for that is manufactured in Japan. So the scandium goes first to Japan and then the substrate goes to the US. Yttrium is for heat-resistant coatings of the nozzles of jet engines. And it is also a substantial content of hot-rolled plates with a certain rare earth metal that I will not mention, and that is for the US Army. It's basically lighter than aluminum and it's harder. Then lutetium, 2 US companies consume 90% of China's total lutetium exports. One of the two is a defense contractor. Dysprosium is an indispensable alloy for high working temperature neodymium iron boron magnets, but that is only part of the market. The US defense demand is really small. I mean, last year, China exported to the US 7,440 tons or so of rare earth permanent magnets. The demand for NdFeB magnets at the Pentagon, one expert estimated as 193 tons. So, but anyway, the demand will increase because they will use smaller drones, for example, for which you need high power electric motors, and they should be small and light. So the NdFeB magnet will be the default for that. Terbium. Terbium is also an alloy for NdFeB. Alloyed with dysprosium, it forms a product called terphenol D, which is very relevant to the US Navy and the US Air Force. We are not talking gigantic quantities here. The application is in kilo quantities, but nonetheless, if you don't have it, you have a problem. Yeah. Gadolinium is for electronic warfare. It's basically electromagnetic interference shielding for equipment. There is one US defense contractor who provides this EMI product. So all 7 elements are not produced outside China. Liners could, for example, produce samarium, but you know, it's a boring product, the price never moves, and it's not very profitable, so they don't do it. The target of the regulations that China uses with these dual-use products is very, very clearly to deny access to the US defense industry. For general civil applications, MOFCOM guarantee an acceptance or denial of export license within 45 days. But this was before they implemented the regulations because something happened that wasn't so beautiful. And the civil industry generally really does not need to worry. But of course, if you're a US company, you will not be the first in line for licenses. There was a hiccup, and I'm going to talk about it. First of all, NdFeB magnets are not on the dual-use list. This is factually wrong. They are collateral damage because everything that contains any element that is on a dual-use list, it is also licensable. So this way, NdFeB magnets that contain dysprosium and terbium, these are the high working temperature NdFeB magnets, they also fall under the restrictions, but we have to observe that about 60% of the NdFeB market are magnets that do not contain any dysprosium or terbium. These are the magnets that you use in furniture, for example. Yeah? China exported this to 130 countries worldwide last year, and these were hundreds of millions of pieces. Yeah? The US imported I think 25 million pieces of NdFeB magnets. Yeah, so these are really crazy small magnets. And again, I will be so interested how you want to label them. So China's S8, and here's part of the screw up in Beijing. China's HS code does not distinguish between dysprosium and terbium alloyed magnets and those without. They only have one HS code for this. So they need to have a subcoding which distinguishes between these two products, licensable and not licensable. So they have to generate that and roll that out. So there are delays. And there's another thing that they did not expect. Even a Chinese ministry is surprised in how many applications these rare earths are landing, and that all sorts of exporters come to them with products that no one has ever heard of, but they contain these elements, you know. So suddenly they are overwhelmed with items that they never thought of restricting. So this is a little bit of fun, and I think it will take several months for them to sort that out. Here are the sources, the materials that I used for this presentation. So I want to say thank you, but I have something. You know, everybody goes about recycling, 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 and recycling. It is not that in China, the 30% recycling rate material used in the production of NdFeB magnets, 30% recycled. It is not that there are hundreds, thousands of Chinese scavenging landfills all over the country for tiny magnets. No. These are NdFeB blanks from which the magnets are being cut, because every customer wants something different. And then you have the commodity magnets, which are the disc magnets, which you can buy on Taobao. So the point is, this is in-process scrap. Here we have the complete production chain of how a magnet is being made. And you can see in step 6, that is the blank that we looked at just now. And this one is being cut. And if you imagine, for example, the magnets in your iPhone or in your earpods, you know, these are tiny, tiny magnets, and you cut them from such a block, you have enormous offcut. So in average, the offcut is probably around 70%. And this is the offcut that goes directly into recycling. It has never been coated. The coating comes only in the next step. And the coating is one of the big problems of recyclers. That's why they came up years ago and wanted to have labeling of every magnet. I'm looking forward to the tiny labels to distinguish what is the coating, because you look at the magnet, you don't know what the coating is, but you have a process that must know it. You know, you cannot remove an epoxy coating and a nickel coating the same way. Yeah. So that is something that I wanted to just throw in, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Thomas. As always, wonderful presentations, eye-opening to many of us. And so this is and also thanks for finishing on time. So this is time for the few questions from the audience, but also if you want to have some crossover discussions between the panels, that I would also encourage. Yeah. And so Abzar, my colleague from EIT, was looking at the questions. I don't know, Abzar, if you have some questions.
Well, we do have.
Yeah, Nasif is already raised a hand. Maybe let's give him a chance to say. Probably on the labeling. Yeah.
On the labeling, of course.
Sorry, Abzar. Yeah, since like labeling was like mentioned so many times, but like Thomas, I wanted here just to make some clarifications actually. So the labeling is not the labeling of the tiny small like magnets. It's the labeling of the product containing the magnet. And the list of products are quite clear. They are under the Article 28 of the CMA. So we're talking about the products from, let's say, the MRI to the wind turbines to the dishwasher, etc. The tricky part will be the electric motors that are containing this permanent magnet that are like widespread, like everywhere, that need to be like labeled as well. So no labeling at permanent magnet level, but at least the part of the products containing the permanent magnet. Just like a clarification from my side. Maybe I was not clearly thanks.
Yeah. So we I also want to mention that there is a parallel meeting going on. We were supposed to be there. Me and Nasif were supposed to be there of the CEN 472 on the standardization, and then the ad hoc working group on labeling is going on. So we'll also, good to understand this. Yeah, Abuzar, any questions?
Yes, we have some good questions from the audience as well, and feel free to ask more if it's popping up in the chat. So I think this is a question from Caroline, the first one. China sees its trade as a long-term strategic process to ensure the development of its people, not the development of the market. As long as West sees things from a market perspective, it falls behind and exposes itself to its weakness. Take some of the fossil fuel subsidies and subsidized strategies areas and their development. As long as West sees things in a market perspective, it will left behind and exposed to its weakness, to some of the fossil fuel. So I think it's more on the fossil fuel subsidies is a wider possibility to go for it. Caroline, you're muted.
You are unmute. Can you unmute? You are muted.
Sorry, classic. So the question, as I understand it, is that I'm sorry, I didn't quite. Can you explain the question to me? You're talking about. Well, I think I get part of it, so I'll respond. The Western response has been state involvement. So in that sense, I mean, I think there was an MP in the House of Parliament who said a couple of years ago, let the market decide, and off he walked. That's not the position in the West now. And it can't be for the reasons we all discussed. So another way of saying that is every country pursues its own interests. I mean, Trump hasn't shown any particular allegiance to the principles of trade and market economies, right? So free trade. So I think it's all up for grabs. Countries are looking at where they can leverage what they have. I don't think it's a fight between a different view of the market. I think it's politics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's more on the broader sense, more on the political sense. The issue is which needs to be resolved in the market's perspective.
So, like you said, rare earth is not a full commodity market. It's largely politically driven, state driven. So, if no state is from the Western side, if state is not involved, you will not have this market. Probably.
No, you can't compete because those aren't the rules of how this game works.
It's a clear message to EU. If you compare to US and Japan and Korea, so that's a clear message to Europe. Thomas, you want to add something? No, okay. So maybe a related question, maybe both Caroline and Thomas, you could answer. Recent, after the dual-use export license, there was some news that Chinese government, MOFCOM, asking South Korean companies of some restraints. What is this all about? For example, we know some alternate supplies coming from Korea, like Star Group sending magnets so they should sell it's outside China supply. So how much truth is there? Can they control the outside China supplies?
But that's good old-fashioned leverage. And that's what countries are doing at the moment. They're leveraging their trade position to their advantage with third-party countries. And there's no other way around it. But I just want to make a comment too about the dual use and the sort of civilian use, to give the example of gallium and germanium. Now, there are plenty of examples of gallium and germanium that are not military. We're watching this through optical fiber that uses germanium to send the signal over long distances. But after the export controls came in, not 1 kilogram of gallium or 1 kilogram of germanium has gone to the US, period, despite it having US companies one of the largest consumers of germanium in the world. So that is why a lot of consumers are feeling very anxious, because they look at what happened before. Also with gallium and germanium, it took 3 months for anything to move. So that's 5 months since you ordered.
And Thomas, specifically on this Korean communication, you hear anything more? Yeah.
In August 2020, 3 American senators wrote a letter to a harbor in Baltic Sea harbor of Germany, where the Nord Stream gas pipeline was supposed to end. and they demanded that the harbor stops all and any cooperation with this project under an extreme threat of sanctions. Now, there are several problems with this. First of all, they are senators. They are part of the legislative. They're not in the executive. They are not supposed to do something like this, you know. And the other thing is, there is communication between, say, private companies or state-owned companies and foreign governments. Take, for example, anti-subsidy investigations of the EU in China. So there is direct interaction, but it is generally extremely bad style. Especially in this case, China should have asked the Korean ambassador in Beijing to please convey to his government that China will not view it kindly if they transfer products that are restricted from China to the United States. You know, that should have been the approach. So it is, I must say, extremely bad style and very unusual for China, especially under Foreign Minister Wang Yi. I would not have expected something like this.
But yeah, thanks for that. But that's happening. So, yeah, Abzar, any follow-up question?
Yes, I think there's another one from Caroline again, and it's mostly on the current increase in the permanent magnets and rare earth demand for the green transition, and then China is putting these pressures. Do you think that there's a fear in the European market?
Sorry, how do you mean? In terms of what?
In terms of these export controls and in terms of the increased demand.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, that's what the point I was trying to make with the map and the calculation was quite, I mean, we have great projects. I take nothing away from that. And it's an incredible journey for them to have got to this point because it's very, very hard. But the quantities are small. If anyone's serious about diversification, that is not, it's just not enough. Just period.
And what about the end user in the defense sector? So this scarcity will affect the
well, I think it's different because it's smaller. I think there's the ruling by 2027, all the permanent magnets have to not have touched China or Russia or Iran. So I'm sure they're building it. In terms of looking at the market overall, we tend not to look at that because it's not commercially relevant like the big mass applications. I'm sure they wish it hadn't been done now. I'm sure they wish it done be later. But to imagine that they're not working on this at all, I think is just wrong.
So on a follow-up, maybe for both Caroline and Thomas, what is the short-term impact of this export dual use? Is the magnet supply already? You have been talking with the companies, the downstream. Is there a disruption? If
Absolutely.
Not in 2 weeks, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Everything stops. Since the end of February, it's not April, it's everything stops. There is nothing moving. And there are companies that have some stocks. Normally when there's some amount of restriction, you discover stocks you never knew existed. But on the magnet side, you can't stockpile magnets because they're all different and they're all for different applications and some of them become obsolete. So there are people phoning around saying, do you have anything? Do you have anything? They don't have, they have a few months. They just don't have. And what are you basing on what's going to happen on? What happened with gallium germanium? Or how will they handle this? How will the export control? Also, there's another requirement, which is for magnets to be sample tested. So if you ask for a license, you have to send a sample to be tested at a government lab to prove that it doesn't have dysprosium and terbium above a threshold level. And they said to me, well, how do we do that? That's impossible. There's only one government lab that does this. It's the scale of it. You've got one company source. You have hundreds and hundreds of customers and they all need different things. And please spare a thought for the people that only need really small quantities, like Thomas said. You might only need a tiny bit for your semiconductor application, but you need it.
Yeah. So the Chinese ministry will be overwhelmed, like Thomas said. Thomas, you want
I think we're all overwhelmed at this point. It's like just.
I think a little bit perspective is that China's rare earth oxide production is quite dependent on imported raw materials. So one can probably reasonably say that 1/3 to 1/2 of China's rare earth oxide production bases on imported products. Now, the trouble is that Myanmar dropped out as a supplier, and it was an important supplier. It was about 50% of China's rare earth import value in 2024. It didn't drop out for technical reason, and it dropped out because the management changed in the area of Kachin, where the mines are, and the new managers also wanted to benefit. So they suggested a service fee for protection of the mines of 20%, which is clearly too high, but they insisted, so the purchasing from Myanmar stopped. And there's also, I think also the Chinese miners have returned home. So that one is finished, and that is a lot. And then on top of that, we have the tariffs against Mountain Pass in China. Very funny, you know, the CEO of MP Materials, he kind of suggested, oh, this is a take or pay contract. If they don't take it, they still have to pay for it. Probably he hasn't read the force majeure clause, you know, acts of God, acts of government, and all that excluded. So also there is material missing. So China, I think, could envision that it would go into a shortage, which would drive up prices. And what Caroline described earlier was when prices go up, suddenly the market is dead. And the reason is these NdFeB magnets, face it, they are nice to have. They are the most efficient and the strongest magnet we know, but there was life before the NdFeB magnet, and there will be life after the NdFeB magnet. If it's no longer cheap, the demand goes down. And that is the same for automotive EV manufacturing. Yeah, they all want to have it because they want to put vehicles with family vehicles with 400 horsepower onto the road that accelerate from 0 to 100 in under 4 seconds. Who needs that? Yeah. So, but everybody wants to compete on that level, so they want these magnets, but only when they're cheap. If they become expensive, they don't want them anymore. So that is also what a dynamic that happens in China. Also in China, people are looking for alternatives to NdFeB magnets. They also look for alternatives of the lithium-ion battery. So you know this is something, and that Caroline has wonderfully demonstrated. When prices go up, suddenly the demand goes away. So, and in China they have a problem. They have huge capacity. There's 500,000 tons of rare earth processing capacity. There is close to 600,000 tons of magnet capacity, rare earth permanent magnet capacity. This they didn't build for fun. This was forward-looking. This is part of it is substitution. They want to force smaller players out of the business, and therefore they build these oversized capacities. So probably 2 years down the road, the capacities will be less than they are today. But of course they want to continue export. But they could see that they're running into a shortage of rare earths. And what happens when rare earths become short, it's a very small market, prices immediately spike. And that is the last thing that they need for their downstream magnet supply chain. You know, yeah. So this in this context, the new regulations are playing a nice role in delaying shipments, you know, and making sure that the demand does not exceed the supply in rare earths. You know, yeah, there's brings some balance into the game. Recently, even rare earth prices have dropped absurdly because the supply situation is not really good. Yeah?
Thank you for saying that, because I have it is anyone in the world who explains supply is restricted, the price doesn't move, and they just look at you.
Yeah, but this is the reason. Yeah. And also be fair, you know, in terms of magnet export, yes, everybody complains their contracts are not being shipped. But, you know, some of these people, they don't want the stuff anymore because they look forward and they can see the demand for their own finished product evaporating in the trade war rubble. You know, there's everywhere is gun smoke. You don't know what is tomorrow. Some of them may actually not want to have the delivery anymore.
Yeah. Abuzar, any relevant questions from the list?
Yes, we have a quick one. Is there any critical raw material magnet recycling activities in Africa? It's a very generic one, probably. Or any resources.
Maybe, you know, as in the case of even other countries, maybe not much. Maybe it could feed to the feedstock of the recycling companies in other part of the world, probably China.
Yeah, I think that question comes back to that recycling as a presentation, because your feedstock is so different. If you're talking about mining feedstock, if you're talking about recycling, that's another universe.
Yes.
Another question is on the global stakeholders look to diverse from concentrated rare supply chain. What practical models of collaboration? I think it's more about, is it a possibility to have this joint processing hubs in which you can develop the whole supply chain in collaboration with countries like Australia, Japan, India, to make it much more resilient? Or we need to play in this silos environment, Europe developing its own supply chain, China developing its own? Or this
I think it's more about survival. I mean, it would be great to have a hub, but it's not. It's about maintaining production. Bear in mind that making rare earth products has been loss-making for a couple of years. So, and prices aren't moving, and consumers are still demanding those prices. Somebody phoned up and said, yeah, no, we know it's being restricted, but can you give us some? And yet the price hasn't changed. So if you want to separate rare earths and make a product, it has to have a margin to it. And that's the problem that you want to be staring at, I think, rather than saying, well, can we just do stuff collectively?
Yeah, and you know, like Thomas.
There's, you know, it happens ever again that some silly junior rare earth miner stands there, oh, China is manipulating the rare earth prices down in order to destroy us. No, they understand this function of the price to the downstream markets. If prices go up, say if NdPr prices go to $200, like many of the junior miners are dreaming of, the demand suddenly evaporates. It's gone. And China, in my observation, for decades, China has been struggling with this and with another little element that is overlooked, that is the rare earth inherent imbalance. The lanthanides occur together. They are fused together. You cannot cherry pick one of them. You have to produce them all. I would also advise the EU to never, ever accept any separation facility that does not start at lanthanum and end at lutetium. Absolutely. So anyway, you produce one of them up to market demand. You may be underproducing others or excessively produce another product, because 70% of your content is lanthanum and cerium, which China has also been wrestling with for decades. If you look at the research and development, China puts enormous funds into the application research of the cheapest rare earths in order to create a balance. And they've been struggling with this forever. And now of course, they don't want to see a foreign supply chain coming up. It's not about us having done the effort for 60 years and here and there. No, somebody will kick the carefully nursed balance, you know, out of balance again. Yeah, because they cannot control the quantities that are produced overseas. And then suddenly all together they are going down economically. This is the rare earth inherent imbalance is something that really needs a very, very close look. Yeah. People underestimate that. So, and then this, on top of that, the price problem, if prices rise too high, the demand evaporates. Yeah.
There was actually
And Nasib, you have been quite quiet for some time.
Yeah,
you want to raise any point?
This was like super like interesting like discussion. I mean, like just to follow up on the conversation, like like beyond the balance problem, and just to like discuss about this like potential models of collaboration under the CRMA. Like indeed, there is the strategic like project and the CRM centers and other let's say let's say mechanism to ensure like better collaboration between let's say the different actors and like partners, not only inside the EU but also with outside the EU. And let's say one specific example that I can give, for example, on the strategic projects, are the number of applications. For the first call, there were, I think, more around 170 or 200 like applications, and I think around 50 were outside the EU, and meaning that the EU is also open to this kind of strategic like partnerships to also like de-risk and let's say increase the let's say resilience and equitable access to like this kind of value chain. Yeah, beyond the balance problem that is like well explained.
Yeah, that's good. And maybe a couple of minutes. And also we hear on recycling, we have been a lot of focusing on recycling in EU. And Thomas and Caroline, we have been hearing that maybe the Chinese, when you sign the contract, Chinese are asking for that after the end of life, they are mandating to send back the magnet. Have you heard about this, or is it also a state mandated thing coming up?
I haven't heard about that specifically.
I think they are testing the water, but it's a well-known fact that Chinese invested companies in Europe have been exporting magnet scrap from Europe to the Philippines, where it's pre-processed and then goes to China. This is an ongoing business, has been going on all the while, and then learned consultants are sitting there calculating how much of the magnets should be in which landfill in the EU 27. It's gone already. Yeah. It's so funny, people talk about things that don't even exist anymore.
Yeah, interesting observation. Yeah, but yeah, so whatever we have, so we should be aware of that, and then we should deal with it. So
Can I just add something on Thomas, but just to make a point of how universal that law is? I was listening to a conference call on a uranium producer, and that also builds nuclear power facilities, and he just made the comment: if the price goes up, you kill demand; if the price goes down, you kill supply. So that law just keeps on applying.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we can wind up now. And thank you all for, I just want to remind you that this is a series, what we call a Rare Earth Roundtable series that we conduct every month. And it's part of an EU project called Magellan, largely focusing on the recycling issues. And the project where EIT is a member, project is coordinated by Orano, a well-known player traditionally in nuclear industry, but they are moving out of or they are diversifying into rare earths and battery materials. So thanks also for Orano for helping us to organize this webinar, and all our Magellan project consortium members. And first of all, and also, I would like to thank all my panelists for your time. It's late in Singapore, and Caroline and Nasib for joining and providing the perspective. And last not least is our audience. We have been 130 when we started, and we had about 200 registrations. And thank you all for joining. And next month we will have a specific session during the Raw Materials Summit organized by EIT Raw Materials, which is in 13th to 15th in Brussels. If any of you interested, please join us in Brussels for the EIT Raw Materials Summit. There are a couple of sessions specifically on magnet and rare earths. So thank you for this, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you all. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for the invitation. Have a good day.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, bye-bye.